Luciana never imagined that her life could be traded like an object as the car stopped in front of the imposing mansion. She felt the weight of every wrong decision that had brought her there. Her father didn't even look back as he handed her over to the tall, intimidating stranger who now watched her with icy eyes. "Welcome to hell," she murmured softly, but loud enough for him to raise an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you're already complaining," he said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "We haven't even started yet." She swallowed hard. What did he mean by that? The sound of the car doors slamming echoed like thunder in the silence of the night. Luciana felt the biting October cold cross her skin, but it wasn't the wind that made her body shiver. It was the weight of that empty suitcase in his hands, a cruel symbol of everything he had lost. She tried to convince herself that she was dreaming, that this couldn't be real. But his father's hard gaze, illuminated by the dim street light, said otherwise. "You made your choice when you decided to live this way," he said, his voice slurred by exhaustion and drink. "I can't support you anymore, girl. This will solve everything." Did you solve it? Solved. What? The bottomless pit of his debts. The cruelty of the stepmother who never accepted her. Luciana opened her mouth to protest, but the words died before they could even come out. She knew that tone. There was no going back. On the other side of the car, Enzo Vasquez waited motionless as a statue, tall, masculine and imposingly handsome. He seemed carved from marble, a man who exuded power and mystery. His gray eyes, cold as steel, were like an endless winter, no heat, no emotion. He did not see marriage as a bond of love, but as a simple contract, and Luciana was now part of an agreement she hadn't signed, so it's her. His voice was low, controlled, almost indifferent. A shiver ran up Luciana's spine. He didn't even blink as he watched her, as if he were appraising a piece of art at an auction. "Yes," her father replied, avoiding looking at her. "She's all yours, just make sure the money arrives in the account tomorrow." Luciana felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Money account? Was this a business? A transaction? How could it be? She was his daughter, his blood. But the squeeze on her arm he gave her, as he pushed her towards the stranger, made it clear that to him she was never anything more than a commodity. "Come on," Enzo said the word, short and sharp as a blade. He didn't offer help, didn't ask if she was okay. He simply turned and started walking towards a shiny black car, parked a few meters away. Every step towards the vehicle seemed to cost a part of his soul. The smell of new leather and the metallic shine of the dashboard made her feel even smaller, like she was entering a world where she didn't belong. When they arrived at their destination, she barely noticed the luxury of the mansion in front of her. All she saw were tall bars and huge windows that seemed to watch her like invisible eyes. Enzo led her inside without saying a word, his firm footsteps echoing through the wide hallways. The air there was different, heavy, full of secrets. "She didn't understand your room," he said finally, opening a door and revealing a room as large as the apartment where she lived. "Tomorrow we'll talk about rules." Rules? She wanted to scream. Ask what was happening, demand answers, but something about his posture, the way he watched her as if she were an intruder in her own destiny, made her swallow her words. Enzo closed the door behind him, leaving her alone. Luciana fell to her knees on the floor, tears streaming down her face as the weight of reality hit her. She just wanted to sell her paintings to survive. She never imagined it would take her to a place like that. But as she cried, a thought crossed her mind. Why does he look as bothered as I do? There's something he's not saying. The first meeting, Luciana didn't know what to expect that morning, but it certainly wasn't this: a table set with fine crockery, a man who seemed carved from marble, and a silence so heavy it could be cut with a knife. When he looked up from the newspaper and stared at her, as if she were an intruder in her own destiny, she knew that that would be the day that everything would change again. The dim light of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains when Luciana was awakened by a firm knock on the door. It was Beatrix, the housekeeper, with her impeccable posture and neutral expression. "Good morning, miss," she said, emotionless in her voice. "I'm Beatrice. Mr. Vasquez asked me to accompany you to breakfast." He wants to see me," Luciana asked hesitantly. Her voice was shaking, but she tried to maintain her composure.
"Yes,"
replied Beatrix, already turning her back. "Follow me." As they walked through the wide corridors, Luciana tried to absorb every detail of that intimidating place. Expensive paintings decorated the walls and the smell of polished wood mingled with a soft scent of fresh flowers. It was beautiful but cold, as if everything there was untouched. Inaccessible. When they arrived at the dining room, Enzo was sitting at the head of a long table reading a newspaper while drinking black coffee. He looked up when she entered, and that penetrating gaze again made her feel exposed. "Sit down," he ordered, indicating a nearby chair. His voice was calm, but there was something about it that made her tense. Luciana aided, keeping her eyes down. The table was set with fine crockery and shiny cutlery, but she barely noticed the food. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing the same question. "What will happen now before we start?" Enzo began, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "I need to clarify a few things." He paused as if he was carefully choosing his words. "You're here because your father owed me a debt he couldn't pay. So he offered you up as part of the deal." Luciana felt her blood run cold in her veins. "Offered?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Exactly," he continued without a trace of remorse. "I'm not a fan of marriage or emotional ties, but business is business. You'll be my wife on paper. That will solve certain legal problems for me in return. You'll have financial security, a roof over your head, food on the table. But there are conditions." She swallowed hard, trying to process what she was hearing. Wife on paper. It felt surreal, like it was part of a bad movie script. "What kind of conditions?" "First," he said, leaning forward, "you will follow my rules. You will not question my decisions. Second, you will maintain a proper public appearance, events, social engagements. You will be by my side when necessary. Third," he paused again, as if assessing the impact of his next words, "there will be no emotional involvement. This is a contract, not a relationship." Luciana felt a lump tighten in her throat. "What if I say no?" Enzo raised an eyebrow, as if the idea were absurd. "You can leave, of course, but then you'll be back to where you were before, or worse. Your father doesn't have the resources to support you, and I doubt anyone else will be willing to help." His words were like sharp knives, cutting off any hope of escape. Luciana knew he was right. With no money, no family, no prospects, she had nowhere to go. It was that or nothing. "Understood," she murmured, avoiding looking at him. "Excellent." He picked up a cup of coffee and took a sip, as if the matter was closed. "Now eat, we have a busy day ahead of us." Later, Luciana was taken to a huge office where Enzo presented her with a series of documents, contracts, official papers, terms she barely understood. Beatrice remained at the side, watching her carefully. As Enzo explained each clause, "This," he said, pointing to a specific line, "guarantees that you will have access to a bank account exclusively for your personal needs, clothes, supplies, whatever you need, as long as you don't go overboard." Luciana signed the papers with shaking hands, feeling like she was selling her soul. When he finished, Enzo put the documents in a locked drawer and turned to Hero. He said, crossing his arms, "Let's talk about what happens tonight." She looked at him, confused. "Tonight? There's a charity event. I need your presence. By my side. It's important for business." It was the beginning of a night that would change everything. Luciana didn't know, but those hours among strangers would be just the beginning of a much greater journey. The reflection of the stranger. Luciana knew that that night would be different from all the others. When Enzo led her by the arm towards the luxurious room, she felt everyone's eyes on her, but there was something else. A mysterious man at the next table whispered something that made Enzo frown. What was he hiding? The hall was a sea of twinkling lights and low murmurs, like a symphony of luxury and power. Luciana felt like an intruder in a world she never imagined she would inhabit. The people around her looked so at ease in their expensive suits and designer dresses as she struggled to maintain an upright posture, her fingers nervously clenching the small bag Beatrice had insisted she carry. Enzo walked beside him with firm, confident steps, as if the ground beneath his feet were made of brittle glass, something he would never allow to touch him. Cervezos. An elegant woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and a vibrant red dress approached them with a practiced smile. "What a pleasant surprise. And who is this charming young woman at your side?" Enzo cast a quick glance at Luciana before responding, his voice calm but firm. "This is Luciana, my fiancée." The word echoed in her mind like thunder. Bride. He hadn't mentioned it before. She tried to hide her shock, forcing a polite smile as the woman extended her hand to shake her, delighted. said the woman, not hiding the curiosity in her bright blue eyes. I'm Clara Montero. I didn't know Enzo was engaged. Congratulations to you both, Luciana murmured, a barely audible thank you, while Enzo responded with a brief wave. Excuse me, Clara, he said, guiding her away before any more questions could be asked. As soon as they were out of the woman's reach, Luciana turned to him, her eyes wide. Fiancé, you said it would just be a contract. That's exactly it, he replied without looking away from the surrounding guests. A contract, a marriage on paper. This will make some things easier. Fewer questions, less complications. But why? She could barely process it all. Why lie about it? It's not a lie, he replied with a tone that bordered on impatience. You will be by my side in public. It's simpler that way. Now be quiet and smile. We are being watched. Luciana gritted her teeth, feeling a wave of frustration rising within her. How could he be so cold, so calculating? He was just another piece on a chessboard, moved according to his strategies, but she wasn't a piece. It was a person with feelings and dreams that he seemed unable to see. Later, during dinner, Luciana found herself sitting next to Enzo at a private table, surrounded by business people and socialites who talked about investments, mergers, and charitable events. She barely understood half the conversations, but she feigned interest, nodding occasionally, while keeping her smile in place. The weight of the situation suffocated her, but she knew she had no choice but to play along with his game. It was then that an older man with gray hair and a dark gray suit leaned towards her with a friendly smile. So Luciana, what do you do for a living? She hesitated, surprised by the direct question. I am an artist, she replied, unsure of how he would react. Artist? The man raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. What kind of art? Paintings, she explained, gaining a little more confidence. I like to capture emotions in colors, shapes. I try to show what words can't express. Interesting, said the man with a genuine sparkle in his eyes. Maybe someday I can see your work before Luciana could respond. Enzo intervened, his voice cutting like a blade. She's focused on other priorities right now, he said, leaving no room for discussion. But maybe another time. The man seemed disconcerted by the interruption, but soon changed the subject, turning to Enzo to discuss business. Luciana felt the heat rise to her face, a mixture of shame and anger bubbling inside her. Why had he done this? Why wouldn't he allow her to talk about something she loved? When dinner ended, and they finally left the event, Luciana was exhausted, both emotionally and physically. The entire ride back to the mansion, she remained silent, staring out the window as the city lights passed by in a blur. When they arrived, she got out of the car without waiting for him, quickly going up the stairs. Enzo followed her to the bedroom, where she had already started to take off the high shoes that hurt her feet. Do you have anything to say? He asked, standing in the doorway. Yes, she replied, turning to face him. Why did you humiliate me there? Why didn't you allow me to talk about my art? Because it doesn't matter, he said with a coldness that made her shudder. You are here for a specific reason. Luciana, your art is not part of that. How can you say that? She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but fought to hold them back. My art is who I am. It's the only thing that has ever made me feel alive. Then maybe it's time for you to grow up and accept reality, he replied, his voice rising for the first time. You can't keep living in a dream world, while the rest of us deal with what really matters. His words hit her like a punch in the gut. She wanted to scream, hit him, do anything to ease the pain she felt, but instead she just shook her head in defeat. You don't understand, he murmured, before entering the bathroom and locking the door behind him on the other side. Enzo remained motionless for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew he had crossed a line, but he couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. Luciana was just an obligation, a means to an end, so why did his words echo in his mind like a distant echo? That night, as Luciana lay on the huge bed that seemed to swallow her small body, she promised herself that she wouldn't let Enzo steal her essence. He could control her life, but he couldn't control who she was, and somehow she would find a way to keep her art alive, even if it was the last thing she did. The first night, Luciana knew that night would be different. As she walked through the quiet hallways of the mansion, she felt something in the air, something she couldn't name. When Enzo appeared at her bedroom door, his expression was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was as if he too was fighting something neither of them were ready to face. The next few days at the mansion were a mixture of silent tension and mechanical routine. Luciana tried to keep her distance from Enzo as much as possible, but it was impossible to ignore his presence. He seemed to be everywhere in the office, at the meeting she occasionally attended, in the wide hallways of the house. Always impeccable, always controlled as if he were made of something unbreakable. But what bothered her most was the emptiness he left around her. There was no laughter, no casual conversations, no light moments. The mansion was a beautiful but cold place, like an art gallery, where no one ever touched the works. Luciana felt suffocated by that atmosphere, yearning for something that could bring warmth back into her life. One morning, while exploring the property to take her mind off things, she found a half-open door on the second floor. Curious, she peeked inside the room and discovered a large room with windows that went from floor to ceiling, allowing natural light to flood the space. The walls were covered in shelves full of books and old paintings, but what caught his attention was the easel in the center of the room, covered in a white cloth. His heart sped up. That felt familiar, as if someone had already used that space to paint carefully. She entered and lifted the cloth, revealing a blank canvas next to the easel. There were paints and brushes organized in wooden boxes, as if they were patiently waiting for someone who never arrived. Luciana couldn't resist. He sat down at the easel and began to work. At first it was just a tentative dash, an attempt to reconnect with something that had been taken from her. But as the minutes turned into hours, colors began to flow freely. She painted without thinking, letting her emotions guide each brush stroke. It was as if for the first time since arriving there, she could breathe. Enzo was in the office when Beatrice appeared at the door, holding a tray of coffee. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I think you should see something." He looked up from the documents on his desk, intrigued by the unusual tone in the housekeeper's voice. What it was? "It's about Miss Luciana." Beatrice paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "She's in the art room." "Art room?" Enzo frowned. "What art room?" "Mr. Vicino wife's old painting room," Beatrice explained, referring to Enzo's mother who had passed away years before. "Nobody's been in there since, but this morning I found the door open, and well, she was painting." Enzo was silent for a moment, surprised. He knew that Luciana was an artist, but he never imagined that she would have the courage to enter that place for him. The room was sacred, a sanctuary of memories he preferred to keep locked away. "Did she touch anything, move things?" "No, sir. She just used the materials that were there." He sighed, putting the papers aside. "I'll take a look." When he arrived at the living room, Enzo stopped at the door, observing Luciana without her noticing. She was completely absorbed in her work, her loose hair falling over her shoulders as her fingers moved with precision. Over the screen there was something mesmerizing about her concentration, something he couldn't look away from. Then he noticed what she was painting. It was a vibrant scene full of light and color. A beach at sunset with waves dancing under the orange sky. It was so different from the dark monochromatic landscapes he associated with modern art. It was alive. "What are you doing here?" His voice echoed through the room, making her jump. Luciana turned quickly, the brush still in her hand. "I just wanted to see space," she stuttered, clearly nervous. "I didn't know it was forbidden." "It's not forbidden," he replied, entering the room, "but it's also not a place I usually share." She looked down, embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to break into anything. It's just I needed to paint." Enzo approached the easel, examining her work. "That's good," he said, finally, surprising her. "Very good. Did you like it?" She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "It has passion, something that a lot of things around here lack." Luciana felt a strange heat rise to her face. "Thanks." There was a moment of silence between them, something that seemed different than usual. Enzo looked uncomfortable, like he was struggling with something he didn't understand. Finally he said, "You can continue using this space if you want, as long as you keep everything in order." She blinked in surprise. "Serious?" "Yes," he said, turning to leave. "But remember, this doesn't change anything." Luciana watched him leave, confused and intrigued. Why had he allowed that? What did that gesture mean? She didn't know it, but something inside her felt a little lighter that night. As Luciana lay in bed, she promised herself that she wouldn't let Enzo steal her essence. He could control her life, but he couldn't control who she was. And somehow she would find a way to keep her art alive. even if it was the last thing she did. Will this little connection between Luciana and Enzo change their destiny? Sign up now to find out what happens on the night that will shock everyone. The first night Luciana felt the air change. As soon as he entered the room, Enzo was different, more human, less controlled. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before, hesitation. And then without warning, everything changed, the unexpected touch, the warmth of closeness. It was as if the entire world disappeared, leaving just the two of them. The night was silent in the mansion, but inside Luciana, a storm of emotions raged. She had spent hours painting in the art room, trying to channel her frustration and confusion into colors and shapes. When he finally returned to his room, he expected to find peace. Instead, he found Enzo standing in the doorway, his posture tense, but something different in his eyes. "You're still awake," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Yes," she replied, surprised to see him there. "I couldn't sleep." He hesitated for a moment, as if he was fighting something inside himself. "Can I come in?" Luciana nodded, curious and nervous at the same time. He entered, closing the door behind him. The low clicking sound echoed in the silence of the room, amplifying the tension between them. "I wanted to talk to you," he continued, approaching slowly. "About earlier today, in the pain room." She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What do you have?" "You caught me off guard," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't expect anyone to be able to bring life to that place again." Luciana felt a tightness in her chest. This was the first time he had said anything remotely personal. "That room is special to you, isn't it?" Enzo looked away, for a moment, as if he was considering whether he should respond. "It was my mother's," he said finally. "She loved painting after she died. I locked everything up. I didn't want anyone to touch her things." Luciana remained silent, absorbing those words. It was as if he was opening a small in her emotional armor. "Why did you let me use the space?" Then, because he hesitated again, looking uncomfortable. "Because you reminded me of her passion, of the way she saw the world." That confession took her by surprise. She had never imagined that he could be capable of feeling something so deep. Without thinking, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Do you really think so?" asked her voice soft. Enzo looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting something she couldn't name. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse, "but it scares me." "Why?" "Because I don't know what to do with this," he admitted, taking another step forward. Now they were close enough that she could feel his body heat. "I don't know what to do with you." Luciana felt her heart accelerate. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she raised her hand shyly, touching his arm. It was a simple gesture but full of meaning. Enzo closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was fighting something inside him. When he opened them again, there was something different about them, something warm, intense. He raised his hand, gently touching her face. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, but didn't move away. "This shouldn't be happening." "But it is," she replied, her voice barely audible. It was then that he kissed her. The touch of his lips was soft, tentative, as if he were testing the limits of something he didn't fully understand. But when she responded to the kiss, something changed. The hesitation disappeared, replaced by an intensity that swept over them like a wave. A growing, burning desire between two bodies that yearned for each other. The world around seemed to disappear. There were no more contracts, rules, or expectations. There was just them, two hearts beating in sync, two worlds colliding in unexpected ways. When they finally separated, they were both panting, as if they had run a marathon. Enzo rested, his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. When their eyes met again, there was a mix of passion and uncontrollable desire. And then they gave in a new, prolonged kiss that said everything they were feeling and needing. At that moment, he took her to the bed, where desire spilled out, but in a moment of lucidity. Before it was the final act, he walked away. "This can't happen again," he said, his voice full of conflict. "Why not?" she asked, looking at him. Luciana was on fire. The world could end at that moment. She was where she wanted to be. She wanted to give her body and soul to him. At that moment, she was confused by the separation. Because it will complicate everything," he replied, slowly backing away. "And we can't afford complications." Luciana watched as he left the room, leaving her alone again. His heart was racing, His body was on fire and his mind was spinning with 1,000 different thoughts. What had just happened, and what did this mean for their future? The silence between them. The next morning, the air between them was different. There was something unspoken hovering in the room, something that neither of them seemed willing to face. But as Enzo tried to regain his cool and controlled posture, Luciana realized that that night had changed something inside her, something that she could no longer ignore. The soft light of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains. When Luciana woke up, she sat up in bed, still wrapped in the soft sheets, but her mind was far away. Memory of the night before invaded her thoughts, like a silent storm. Enzo's touch, the heat of his kiss, the hesitant words he murmured. Before leaving, she brought her hand to her lips, as if she could feel their contact again. Had that been real, or just a dream, born of your loneliness and desire for connection? But I knew it wasn't a dream. Enzo's eyes, usually as cold as ice, had sparkled with something she had never seen before: vulnerability. And now, as she tried to understand what that meant, she felt torn between hope and fear. At breakfast, Enzo was sitting at the head of the table, reading the newspaper as he always did. His face was an impenetrable mask, as if nothing had happened. When Luciana entered the room, he didn't even look up. "Good morning," she said hesitantly. "Good morning," he replied, without looking away from the newspaper. His voice was calm, but there was something artificial about it, like he was trying too hard to sound indifferent. Luciana sat at the table, feeling the weight of the silence between them. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected, again separating them. She wanted to ask about last night, but she knew it wasn't time. Not there, not in that house full of watchful eyes. "Do you have any appointments today?" he asked, finally folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "Not that I know of," she replied, surprised by the question. "There is a meeting with some investors in the afternoon. You will need to be present." Luciana nodded, although her heart was sinking. He was acting as if nothing had changed, as if last night was just another transaction between them, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Later during the meeting, and Luciana watched Enzo from afar. He was his usual self-confident, collected, impeccable, but she could see something different in him now. Something no one else seemed to notice. There was a slight tension in his shoulders, an almost imperceptible hesitation in his gestures. When the meeting ended, she followed him into the office, unable to contain her questions any longer. "Enzo," she called, closing the door behind her. He looked up from the documents on his desk, surprised to see her there. "Yes, about last night," she started, but he cut her off immediately. "That shouldn't have happened," he said, his voice firm, but with a hint of frustration. "It was a mistake. A mistake." She felt a pang in her chest, as if his words were a sharp knife. "Is that how you see it?" "Yes," he replied, avoiding looking at her directly. "We have an agreement, Luciana, a contract. It's all that exists between us." "Then why did you kiss me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you let me in that room? Why did you show me something you've never shown anyone else?" He was silent for a moment, as if he was fighting something inside himself. "Because I was weak," he finally admitted. "I let my guard down, and this can't happen again." "Why?" she insisted, taking a step forward. "Because you're afraid of what you might feel. Because you're afraid of being vulnerable. Because I can't afford to be," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "You don't understand, Luciana. I've built my entire life on control, on rules. I can't just throw all that away for something I don't know what it is." She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but fought to hold them back. "You can't control everything, Enzo. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones that are out of our control." He stared at her for a long moment, as if considering her words. But then, with a heavy sigh, he looked away. "It won't happen again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move forward." Luciana nodded, even though her heart was broken. She knew he was right. At least in part, they had an agreement, a life that needed to be kept in order. But she also knew that that night had changed something inside her, something she couldn't just ignore. That night, as she lay in bed, Luciana promised herself that she wouldn't let Enzo suffocate what had started between them. Maybe he wasn't ready to face his feelings yet, but she knew that deep down he was also fighting something bigger than himself. and for the first time she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could help him find his way back to himself. The past that returns. Luciana knew something was different. That morning when Enzo received an unexpected call, during coffee, she immediately noticed the change in his posture. His gray eyes, usually as cold as ice, were filled with something she had never seen. Before fear, the mansion's routine seemed to have returned to normal, after the intense night that they both tried to forget. But that morning something disturbed the fragile balance that Enzo cherished so much. They were sitting at the breakfast table, each in their own thoughts, when the shrill sound of Enzo's cell phone cut through the silence. He answered quickly, his expression changing almost instantly. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tense and controlled, but with a hint of irritation that Luciana rarely heard on the other end of the line. Someone was speaking quickly, the words too muffled for her to understand, but Enzo's reaction was enough to make her alert. He stood up abruptly, moving away from the table to continue the conversation in private. Luciana watched him walk to the garden, his body rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. There was something about the way he walked, like he was trying to contain a storm inside him. When he finally returned a few minutes later, his expression was unreadable. He put his cell phone in his pocket and sat down at the table again, avoiding looking at her. "Everything is fine?" Luciana asked hesitantly. "Yes," he replied, dry, but his hand shook slightly as he picked up the coffee cup. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But Luciana knew it wasn't true. There was something wrong, something big, and for the first time she felt like she needed to know what it was later. While Enzo was busy in a meeting, Luciana decided to discreetly investigate. She knew she shouldn't invade his privacy, but something inside her pushed her to find out what was bothering him so much. She went to his office, where she found the locked drawer, where he kept important documents. Carefully, she looked for something that could give her a clue. It didn't take long to find a folder hidden behind some workbooks. Inside were old letters and faded photographs. One of the photos caught his attention immediately. It was of Enzo, much younger, standing next to a woman she recognized as his mother. They were both smiling, but there was something in Enzo's eyes that she had never seen before. Genuine happiness. Next to the photo was a handwritten letter. Luciana started reading, realizing that it was a letter from Enzo's mother to him. The words were full of love and concern. "My dear Enzo, I know you've always tried to be strong for us, but I want you to know that it's okay to feel, it's okay to cry, be angry, or feel afraid. You don't need to carry the world on your shoulders. Let the people in my son, let them help you, because in the end it's love that keeps us alive." Luciana felt a tightness in her chest. When she read those words, they explained so much about who Enzo was, and who he tried to be. He had built his entire life on control, because he had lost the person he loved most. And now he was so scared of opening up again, that he would rather stifle his feelings than face them. When Enzo returned to the office, he found Luciana sitting at the table, holding the letter and the photo. He froze. For a moment, his eyes wide with surprise and anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but full of tension. "I just wanted to understand," she replied slowly, standing up. "That's your mother, isn't it? Did she write this to you?" Enzo moved forward, quickly snatching the letter and photo from his hands. "That's none of your business," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "You shouldn't be going through my things, because it hurts, doesn't it?" She snapped, her own voice shaking with emotion. "Because you're afraid of feeling again. But running away from it won't make the pain go away. Enzo, it'll just make you more alone." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes full of conflict. Then with a heavy sigh, he looked away. "You don't understand," he murmured. "You don't know what it's like to lose someone you love." "I know exactly what it's like," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I lost my mother when I was a child, and since then I've had to fight every day to find a place where I feel at home. But what I've learned is that love doesn't disappear. When we lose someone, it stays with us, even when it hurts." Enzo was silent for a moment, as if absorbing her words. Then with a tentative movement, he placed the letter and photo back in the drawer, closing it carefully. "I need to think," he said finally, leaving the office without looking back. That night, as she lay in bed, Luciana felt a mixture of hope and worry. He knew he had touched something deep inside Enzo, something he wasn't ready to face. But I also knew that for the first time he was beginning to question the walls he had built around himself. She promised herself that she would keep trying to reach him, no matter how hard it was. A shared storm. When the storm arrived, literally and metaphorically, Luciana and Enzo found themselves trapped on the same boat, or rather in the same mansion. But as the gusts of wind shook the windows, something even more powerful began to change between them. Trust. The morning had started with a gray sky, and a heavy feeling in the atmosphere was strange, as if nature was reflecting the tension that existed between Luciana and Enzo. Since discovering the letters and photos in the office, he had isolated himself even more, avoiding any unnecessary interaction with her. Luciana, on the other hand, felt torn between respecting her space and continuing to try to reach it. But nature didn't give them much choice. Around noon, the wind began to pick up strength, and soon a violent storm hit the region. The rain fell in cascades and lightning lit up the dark sky. Like camera flashes, the mansion's electrical power failed, leaving them in the oppressive silence of a world without artificial light. Beatrice is out of town, Enzo said, entering the room where Luciana sat, lit only by dim candlelight. She went to visit her family before the storm. Lucy looked up, surprised to see him there. He seemed different, less controlled, more human. Maybe it was the darkness, or maybe it was the vulnerability the storm brought with it. "What are we going to do?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "Keep us safe," he replied, his voice firm but without its usual stiffness. "The upstairs windows are old. We need to make sure they can withstand the wind." Pressure. Lucian nodded, standing up immediately. "I'll help." He hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to refuse, but then he nodded as well. "Let's go." The two climbed the stairs to the second floor, where the sound of rain was deafening. The windows creaked under the force of the wind, and some of them were already beginning to sag. Enzo grabbed wooden planks and nails that were stored in an emergency cabinet, while Luciana held candles to light the way. "Hold this here," he said, handing her a board while positioning another against the window frame. "I need to nail them down before the glass breaks." Luciana aided, holding the wood tightly as he hammered the nails with precision. His movements were quick and efficient, but there was something different about him, something she had never noticed before. It was as if in this crisis situation, he was allowing his true personality to emerge. "You're good at this," he commented suddenly, surprising her. "Good at what?" "To help," he replied without looking away from his work. "You don't hesitate, you don't complain, you just do what needs to be done." She smiled slightly, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. "Maybe I learned from someone equally stubborn." He paused for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Then he leaned over and kissed her again. But this time there was no urgent desire. There was a surrender, a softness. Yeah. It was a light kiss, but full of meaning. Luciana offered no resistance. She gave herself over to that unique and magical moment. Then he walked away, without saying a word, and went back to work. But there was something different in his posture, something lighter. It was a brief moment in which neither of them said anything, as if it were something natural to happen. When they finished reinforcing the windows, the storm was still raging outside. They returned to the main room, where the sound of rain hitting the walls echoed like a constant drum. They sat side by side on the couch, enveloped in shared silence. "Have you ever been through something like this before?" Luciana asked, breaking the silent storms. He replied, his voice low. "Yes. My mother used to get nervous about thunder. I always made sure she was safe." Luciana felt a tightness in her chest. This was the first time he had spoken about his mother voluntarily. It must have been hard to lose her. Hesitated for a moment, as if he was pondering his words. It was he finally admitted. "But maybe you're right. Maybe running away from this isn't the solution." She looked at him, surprised by the confession. "Enzo, no," he interrupted, raising his hand. "Don't say anything. Just thank you for being here, even though I don't deserve it." Luciana felt tears welling up in her eyes, but fought to contain them. Instead, she placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his touch. "You deserve more than you think," she murmured. "You just need to let people in." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting something she had never seen before: hope. When the storm finally began to subside, the mood between them had changed. It was no longer a battle of wills, but a silent alliance. They both knew there was still a lot to resolve, but for the first time it seemed possible. End of chapter. This storm brought more than rain and wind. It brought a new chance for Luciana and Enzo. Will they be able to take advantage of it? Sign up now to find out how this story will evolve. The moment of truth, when the storm finally passed, another kind of storm began inside them. Luciana knew there was no longer any way to escape. It was time to face the truth, and Enzo, for the first time in years, was willing to listen. The morning after the storm brought an eerie silence to the mansion. The windows were still boarded up, but the soft light of dawn was beginning to filter through the cracks, illuminating the rooms with a golden glow. It was as if the entire world had been washed away, leaving behind something new and clean. But for Luciana and Enzo, the internal storm was just beginning. Enzo was sitting in the main room, looking down at his hands as he twirled a cup of cold coffee. Between his fingers he seemed lost in thought, something Luciana had never seen before. When she entered he looked up, but said nothing. "Are you well?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded slowly, but his eyes said something else. I need to talk to you," he said finally, his voice low and husky. Luciana sat in front of him, feeling the weight of the words that were about to come. "What is it?" Yesterday during the storm, he paused as if he was fighting something inside himself. "I realized something I've been trying to ignore for a long time." She stared at him, her heart beating fast. "What it was, I'm afraid," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of falling in love. Again, scared of losing someone I love, scared of being vulnerable." Luciana felt a tightness in her chest, but also a small spark of hope. He was finally opening his heart. "We are all afraid, Enzo. But that doesn't mean we should close ourselves off from love." "I know," he replied, lifting his eyes to look at her. "But what if I'm not capable of love? What if I hurt you?" "You're already hurting me," she said, her voice firm, but charged with emotion. "Every time you walk away, every time you close that door, you hurt me. But I'd rather that than never know what could have been." Enzo was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then, with a heavy sigh, he got up and walked to the window, looking at the clear sky outside. "I don't know if I'm good enough for you," he murmured. "You deserve someone who can give you everything, someone who isn't stuck in the past." "I don't want someone perfect," she snapped, standing up to stand beside him. "I want someone real, someone who's willing to fight for us. Because I'm willing to fight for you." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and hope. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," she replied, without hesitation, "because I see who you really are. Enzo, not the cold, controlling man you try to be, but the man who cares, who is afraid, who wants to love, even if he doesn't know how." He looked away for a moment, as if he was fighting something inside him. Then slowly he raised his hand, touching her face gently. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, "but I want to try." Luciana felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time she couldn't contain them. She placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his touch. "Then let's try it together," she murmured. Later, as they walked through the mansion's gardens, they both felt something different in the air. It was as if the weight they had been carrying for so long had begun to lift, but they knew there was still a lot to resolve. It was then that Enzo stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice tense. "What is it?" she asked, surprised by the sudden change in his expression. "My father is coming back to town," he explained. "He's always been against any kind of emotional involvement. He'll try to separate us." Luciana felt a tightness in her chest. "What are we going to do?" "Let's face it," he replied, his voice firm. Together that night, as she lay in bed, Luciana felt a mixture of fear and hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that for the first time they were ready to face it together. A new dawn, the confrontation with the past, was about to happen. But Luciana and Enzo knew they wouldn't face it alone. Together, they had built something greater than any obstacle, something that not even the man who shaped Enzo would be able to destroy. The arrival of Enzo's father was announced like an impending storm. He was a tall, imposing man, with razor-sharp eyes, and a stance that commanded respect or fear. When he entered the mansion, the air seemed to grow heavier, as if the atmosphere itself was preparing for confrontation. "Enzo," he said, his deep voice echoing through the room, We need to talk. Enzo nodded, standing his ground. Luciana was at his side, feeling the weight of the older man's gaze on her. I knew that moment would be decisive in my office. He continued, turning away, without waiting for a response. Enzo and Luciana followed him in silence, each step seeming to echo, like a drum in the wide corridor. When they entered the office, Enzo's father closed the door behind them, creating an invisible barrier between the outside world and the tension building inside the room. Who is she? He asked, pointing at Luciana, with a brusque gesture. She's Luciana, Enzo replied, his voice calm but firm. She's part of my life now. His father raised his eyebrows, surprised by the direct answer. Part of your life? Since when do you allow anyone to interfere in your business? This isn't business, Enzo snapped, taking a step forward. Luciana is not a transaction or a contract. She is important to me. Luciana felt an unexpected warmth in her chest but remained silent, watching the confrontation between father and son. Important, the older man laughed coldly. You've always been weak to feelings, Enzo. They distract you, weaken you. That's why I always taught you to control everything around you. But maybe that's exactly the problem, Enzo replied, his voice rising for the first time. Maybe I spent my whole life trying to be what you wanted me to be, but it cost me who I really am. I don't want to live like this anymore. His father was silent for a moment, his eyes filled with surprise and something that looked like pride, but soon his expression hardened. Again, you're making a mistake, he said finally. This girl will distract you from your goals. She will make you lose control. No, Enzo replied, holding Luciana's hand tightly. She makes me want to be better. She makes me want to fight for something bigger than money or power. Luciana felt tears welling up in her eyes, but fought to contain them. Those words were all she needed to hear. Enzo's father sighed heavily, as if admitting silent defeat. So you're willing to risk everything for her? Yes, Enzo replied, without hesitation, because she's worth it. Later, as they walked through the mansion's gardens, Luciana felt a lightness that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The confrontation with Enzo's father had been difficult but also liberating. They had faced the past together, and it had brought them closer together. Do you really believe that? She asked, looking at him. What am I worth? I know that, he replied, stopping to look at her. You showed me that love is not a weakness. It is a strength, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Luciana smiled, feeling her heart overflowing with happiness. Their lips came together as if they were sealing that eternal commitment, a sweet, calm kiss, full of promises. So Luciana said, let's start this new life together. In the following months, the mansion began to change. The cold walls gained vibrant colors, thanks to Luciana's paintings. Enzo began to open up more, allowing those around him to see who he really was. And for the first time, they both felt like they had found a home, not just within the walls of that house, but in each other's hearts. Luciana and Enzo faced their greatest fears and found love in the most unlikely place. Their journey proves that even in the most violent storms, it is possible to find a new dawn. Thank you for following this moving story.